Playing a role, pretending to be someone else, is, as any child will tell you, a fascinating pastime. But now it's become a craze that's sweeping the southeast, thanks to a game known to its fans as D&D. Now, D&D stands for Dungeons and Dragons, a fantasy game that's something of a cross between a hobby and a cult. It gives children and grown-ups the chance to get away from it all, playing it being knights in shining armour, enchantresses, wizards or medieval monks. A spellbinding game where taking part is more important than winning. Well, Mike Donkin has been discovering how this dream world is now becoming very big business.
Let's just wander around the edge of the balcony and look at the treasure chest.
Life isn't always dull and workaday in the suburbs.
I'm not going to look at the Gorgon, but I'm going to turn around so I'm facing into the room a bit so I can actually sort of see if any of these statues start to move.
In this South London sitting room, they're playing a game that has thousands of devotees under its spell, Dungeons and Dragons. It's one of a new cult of fantasy role-playing games. The world you venture into is a dungeon mapped out on paper.
The intrepid goblin killer.
Each player assumes the character of a tiny painted figure in an adventure that takes him into the heroic, the macabre, and often the very gory,
Blindly stabbing in the dark,
reaching parts that other games don't reach.
Well, they're not at all like other games, and there are no boards, there's no winners or losers. There isn't really an end to the game. And because there isn't very much equipment, or there doesn't have to be very much equipment, the whole game does go on in your mind. Well, people did call us cranks in the early days until they started seeing how popular the whole thing was. I mean, this was sort of labelled a 3-month wonder. Everybody thought that fantasy games were for kids, it was all about fairy stories, and that people ought to be playing the more serious war games. But in fact, they've been shown to be completely wrong, because fantasy games are now a lot more popular than war games ever were.
Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone don't just play these games, they profit from them. 8 years ago, they threw in their regular jobs and slept in the back of a van as they struggled to make the stuff of dreams a saleable commodity. Now this fantasy factory turns out boxed games and models which they sell in their own shops in London, Manchester, Birmingham and Sheffield. The turnover is extraordinary. Penguin have published a series of games books written by Steve and Ian, and all of them have topped the children's bestseller lists. And there's a magazine called White Dwarf, with a circulation of 20,000. Its readers trade ideas and run fantasy championships and conventions.
I'm afraid, Joe, that I'm going to attack you.
Even staff at the games workshop seem gripped. When the production line stops for lunch, it's workers' playtime.
I like the challenge of setting up an entire world with its own laws, peculiar religions, races, reasons for fighting each other, reasons for liking each other.
But you play them to the bitter end, don't you?
Yes, to the bitter end. Many of our game sessions last many hours, 18, 20 hours is not unheard of. But they're riveting during that session, they're riveting and you lose all track of time.
I get on the train and go home. Very often I sit there and make up adventures as I go home. I sit and write them out, try out different plots, invent new characters, and by the time I've got off about an hour and a half later, I've usually got something that I actually keep and develop very often later on the same evening.
Do you ever escape into real life?
Not if I can possibly avoid it, no. No, real life is quite horrible. This is much better.
How much does it take people over? Does it get into their minds and does it grip them?
Well, only totally. Some people become completely obsessed, and they do it for hours and then they play it for whole weekends. And it's so unique in its appeal because you don't know what's going to happen.
With this empire of yours now, though, is a lot of the pleasure just watching the checks roll in.
It's certainly not reached that stage yet, because we started the business off as our hobby. This was our hobby, and we thought, well, I don't know, let's see if we can have a go at making it a business. Really, the whole thing of business is like a game. I mean, it is a game in itself, like Monopoly.
This entire section of floor swings
It's
up
what?
into the wall.
It's like one of these new beds that go into the wall.
These two have disappeared from view.
I see.